Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody's had a great day so far. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're back, welcome back. I greatly appreciate all of the ongoing support. This is my channel, Dragonsjewel Creative Gems, and I'm Tegan, and I'm just gonna get all that wonderful YouTubey stuff out of the way first. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so, just down below. If you like the content you see, don't forget to give a like. And of course, any love, comments, suggestions, all those wonderful things, there's a comment section down there as well for all of that. Today we are diving back into the Ghostly Echoes series. We had been working our way through British Columbia, so now we are going east. We're skipping over Alberta because we already did that one, and we are diving into the ghost stories of Saskatchewan. So I hope you guys enjoy these next few spooky tales. These stories take place from the Prince Albert area in Saskatchewan. Holy Ghosts. Lisa Bosford, a pseudonym, was 12 years old and as excited as any 12-year-old girl can be when there's a sleepover planned for the weekend. She had an overnight bag packed, and when the school bell rang at the end of a seemingly endless Friday, Lisa walked home with her best friend Molly. Overnight stays at Molly's place were always a little more interesting because of the unusual home her family owned. It had at one time been a church with an attached rectory. Services had not been held there for years, though, and the rectory now served as a private residence with an unusual addition. The girls loved to spend time in the church. It provided them with a private place to gossip and tell secrets, and offered perfect acoustics when they felt like singing their favorite songs. Lisa, who had taken years of piano lessons, loved the fact that the grand pipe organ still played beautifully and remained in its place of honor off to the side of the pulpit. Just past midnight, after hours of junk food, conversation, and games, the girls decided to turn in. Lisa had difficulty sleeping, and as she tossed and turned in the unfamiliar bed, her thoughts eventually turned to the lovely organ in the church. She regretted not having found an opportunity to play earlier that evening. Well, why not now, she mused. Everyone else in the house was asleep, but Lisa knew from experience that the walls were well soundproofed, and she would not be disturbing a soul. Silently, she crept into the darkened church, careful to shut the connecting door behind her. It felt good to slide into the cool, highly polished surface of the wooden bench and rest her fingers on the keys. In her mind, she scanned a list of popular songs that she knew by heart, but none of them seemed to suit the moment. Finally, she selected a gentle hymn taught to her as a little girl, and eyes half closed began to play. The music swelled to fill the room, and Lisa swayed slightly on the bench, feeling the keys instead of looking at them. She was playing well, perhaps even beyond her years of instruction, and she marveled at how easily the music was coming to her. The moment Lisa opened her eyes, however, she discovered something far more remarkable. Later, she would describe them as spirits or entities, for that's what she felt they were. They appeared to her as soft points of white light, materializing at the church's front door and floating in line down the aisle. Lisa continued to play, afraid of breaking the spell, and the glowing apparitions continued to enter the church. When there were approximately 20 in all, they broke formation to take places in the pews and stayed obediently still. Incredibly, they seemed to be listening. Showing impressive calm for a 12-year-old girl, Lisa finished playing the hymn. Then, unable to think of another suitably inspirational selection, she sat quietly with her hands in her lap and watched as one by one the beautiful lights winked out. There was a pervading sense of peace when they were gone, and Lisa retreated to the house to sleep dreamlessly for the rest of the night. The event felt special and significant and it was days before she shared the story of her appreciative spiritual audience with anyone. Today, Lisa is a teenager who remembers the incident vividly, but has experienced nothing like it since. On the narrow stretch of highway between Prince Albert and St. Louis, there is a parcel of land that is rumored to hold a terrible secret. Locally, it is known as the Church of the Singing Nuns. And although the musical reference is curious, the strict mores of the Catholic Church play an obvious part. According to legend, a young nun from a local convent became pregnant. Unable to accept this embarrassing development, the other sisters rationalized that the baby must certainly be the work of Satan. When it was born, they took the innocent child and disposed of it by throwing it down a well. That well sits on the aforementioned property along the highway. Believers in the legend contend that if you stop by the spot, there will be a sign of your pilgrimage. You see visitors to the Church of the Singing Nuns come away with tiny little handprints on their vehicles. I met a young woman in downtown Prince Albert who was enjoying her coffee break out of doors on an unseasonably hot September afternoon. We began talking about haunted churches, and she mentioned St. Catherine's Anglican Church, about 5 miles west of the Pen. She said it had once been a favorite location for teenagers' parties, and that she had been there several times during her own high school years. It was always on a dare, she told me. We were absolutely terrified of the place, so it was exciting to hang out in the churchyard and drink a beer or two. The fear was fed chiefly by rumors. They said that a priest committed suicide there and was sometimes seen pacing the floor. They maintained that black masses had been held in the building, although no one knew who officiated or when it might have happened. They had all kinds of deliciously dark stories about the church, passed from person to person over the years. Interestingly, I had already heard of the church by way of the John McClunery Library in Prince Albert. Carol Naylor, head of the audiovisual and periodical department, wrote a letter that included this bit of folklore. The story was that if you rang the church bell 12 times just before midnight on Halloween, the bell would give 13 chimes. This particular tale earned St. Catherine's Anglican Church the catchy nickname Hell's Bells. Unfortunately, the church was burned to the ground by an arsonist a few years ago. The dramatic stories still float around, but the source of the legends is gone. This story takes place near Esterhazy, Saskatchewan. Old Faithful, the Tabor Light. 1905. The wind is still icy today, and though the rain has stopped, the sky remains a compassionless gunmetal gray. Deep ruts line the mucky country road, and for the lone horse pulling a rickety wagon, the going is slow. The young man in the driver's seat is miserably cold in his thin black cloth coat. Even without the telltale white collar at his throat, one would imagine him to be a fellow who works with his brain, not his brawn. His hands are pale, soft, and beginning to chafe from the tugging at the reins for the last 18 miles. He reaches his destination, a raw-looking graveyard surrounded by brush and farmers' fields. There is no church overlooking it, no religious insignia on the rough boards that serve as a gate. The priest knows that there are some graves which no one has bothered to even mark. It is for one of these he has come. He casts a worried glance up and down the lonely road to ensure he has no company. He climbs down off the wagon and walks to the side of the road, but no further. Following another hasty look around, the man clasps his hands and begins futilely to pray. 1923. The bridge game was lively, and the gaiety of the evening caused her to leave a little later than she had planned. Still, it's no concern. This night is lovely for a ride, and is warm air on her cheek and the lazy clip-clop of the horse's hoofs on the hard-packed dirt road. There's no moon to be seen. Even the cemetery ahead is drowned in dark shadows. The individual shapes of the grave markers are lost. Suddenly, the night air is slightly more chilled, and she looks around uncomfortably. It's there. A reddish globe of light trailing behind her on the road. Fearfully, she tugs at the reins, forcing her horse into a brisk canter. The mysterious light increases its speed, maintaining position behind her. She digs her heels into the horse's side and issues a sharp command. It breaks into a run, but every step taken is matched by the phantom light. It is several terrifying eternal minutes before she gallops into her own yard, leaps off the horse, and dives behind the safety of her heavy kitchen door. Finally, the glowing orb disappears in the night. 1935. Heavy clouds are swallowing tonight's moon and stars, and the young farm boy is nervous as he walks home from a neighbor's house along a lonely black stretch of road. He has a gun with him, but he wishes more for company, some conversation to distract him as he walks past the cemetery. Suddenly it's there, a ghostly globe, a pale fire on a snowy road ahead of him. Worse, it's speeding towards him, bearing down on him, and the 12-gauge shotgun feels like 1,000 pounds as he lifts it on his shoulder and squeezes the trigger. The sound of the blast echoes in the night. Terrified and exhilarated, the trembling boy walks down the road to the spot where the light died. He finds nothing but untrampled snow. 1938. It's festive here tonight. Another car pulls up, honking to announce its arrival. And the jug of moonshine gets passed around again. Some of the women have put together lunch pails full of sandwiches and pickled preserves, but most are too excited to eat. There are over 80 people at the cemetery tonight. Someone yells at the driver of the newly arrived vehicle to turn off his headlights. With all the flashlights and brilliantly popping bulbs from the reporters' cameras, it'll be a miracle if they see anything. Yet they hope, and every time someone lights a cigarette in the distance, they jump. The Tabor Cemetery, 17 miles northeast of Esterhazy, qualifies as one of Saskatchewan's most haunted places. Over decades, it has been visited frequently by an unexplainable phantom light. The light appeared so regularly, in fact, that nearby residents chose to dub it Old Faithful. The Tabor light was sometimes described as a ball of fire, slightly reddish or pinkish in color, and occasionally flickering. Witnesses always said the glow appeared to be directed inward. The light never illuminated the surrounding area. Its size was estimated to be roughly that of a 10-quart pail. It was capable of appearing and disappearing magically, and it would either dance along the trees skirting the cemetery or speed along the road that ran past it. Sometimes it moved towards people, sometimes away, keeping a consistent distance in front of its pursuer. On one occasion, in what may qualify as the closest sighting ever reported, a couple claimed the light actually passed through the back seat of their car. Although Old Faithful stayed true to its name and made regular appearance at the Tabor Cemetery, it took more than 30 years to become an overnight sensation. In the late fall of 1938, it became a celebrity of at least provincial proportions, drawing people from all over southern Saskatchewan. Newspapers took a great interest, and the light frequently enjoyed front-page status. The crowds grew as the publicity did. By Thursday, December 1st, 1938, attendant records were beginning to be set as 100 thrill-seekers showed up to spend a cold night at this newly famous graveyard. By Sunday, reporters were thinking to check license plates and found several vehicles from Manitoba and one from Ontario, a testament to the far-reaching appeal of this unsolvable riddle. Local teenagers usually made up a part of the crowd. They had discovered quite a practical use for their Tabor light. It provided the perfect location and excuse for a curfew-breaking date. In the December 2nd, 1938 edition of the Regina Leader-Post, it was written that young boys and girls, questioned by their parents as to their late hours, merely say they were hunting the spook, and the matter is cleared up without another word. The result is Tabor has become not only the most popular meeting place for miles around, but also a center for prolific billing and cooing. Chances are those young people taking advantage of the forever surrounding Tabor Cemetery knew little of its interesting history. It was founded in 1903 by a small group of Bohemian settlers who had become bitterly and openly anti-religious. The desolate site, miles from any church, was chosen so that no clergyman could oversee their funerals. In its first years of existence, it was known to some as the pagan cemetery, because people were buried there without the ministrations of a priest. Such behavior was highly suspect to the people of the area, who clung to simple religious values. When the phantom light was first seen, the general opinion was that it was embodied souls of those buried in Tabor, unable to rest in peace. Suspicions grew that the atheist faction of the Bohemian community, and wild stories spread about sudden disappearances and secret illegal midnight burials. Later, as the anti-religious fervor of the early 1900s was forgotten, other equally superstitious theories took hold. One story hinted strongly at a murder by poison that was to have taken place around 1908. It was greeted skeptically by authorities who offered the supposed victim's certificate of death as proof. The people stood by their story, however, amending it to include the imaginative explanation that no ordinary poison had been used, but a potion that would be invisible to any post-mortem examination of the body. It was further suggested that along with this deadly concoction were strange and special powers handed down for generations within a certain family in the area. By 1938, as crowds gathered to catch a glimpse of the now famous light, farmers in the area shared one common theory regarding its reason for being. They saw it as an omen, a harbinger of doom. One man who claimed that his hometown of Brittany, France, had a similar phantom light was not surprised by their wariness. He admitted that the people back home said their prayers a little better whenever their own light appeared. As editorial in the December 3rd, 1938 edition of the Regina Leader-Post gave voice to those who were not quite so prepared to believe that the Tabor light was of supernatural origin. One may suggest that in due course a natural and scientific explanation will be forthcoming concerning the now famed Tabor light. In the neighborhood of a cemetery in the General Esterhazy, Saskatchewan district, we are living in an age in which there is demand for scientific explanation for much. Some who hew to the argument that this is a universe moving and evolving without the direction of supernatural power insist that in due course there will be scientific explanation of even mysteries touching the traditionally unknown. Indeed, much of the interest in Old Faithful was on behalf of those who adopted the challenge to disprove it was a phantom. Scientific theories abounded. Several people loosely dismissed the light as a will-o'-the-wisp or flammable gases found above marshes or graveyards as a result of organic decomposition. A reporter at the Regina Leader-Post dealt briefly with this idea in the December 1st, 1938 edition. Theorists have laid the cause to rotted trees, phosphorus in the moonlight, or the presence of gas or oil throwing up a glare. Always, though, the theories are dashed when the impish glow appears from another spot. The Leader's Post, December 3rd, 1938 edition quoted one variation on that theme, coming from a Chinese resident of Assiniboia, who claimed to have experienced similar phenomenon in his homeland. He attributed the light to the decay of bodies and decomposition of their blood. Over time, he reasoned the process would release a gas that was phosphorus in nature. It would seem this gas finds its way to the surface and spontaneously bursts into a small light and gradually into a larger light, and then disappears. He said, never explaining how these gases would have moved outside the periphery of the cemetery, where the light was always seen, or how they would move, sometimes with the speed of a vehicle along the road. Some people suggest that the light may be the land-faring equivalent of St. Elmo's fire, a luminous form of corona discharge sometimes seen in the sails of early sailing vessels. What they couldn't address was how such a rare phenomenon, which had only before been witnessed at sea, could appear frequently in the same spot on dry prairie land. Some people suggest that the light may be the land-faring. One of the more popular scientific theories seemed as fantastic as the superstitions it was attempting to replace. The idea presented was the light was nothing more than an owl with phosphorus wings. In the December 9, 1938 edition of the Regina Leader-Post, under the headline, "Light Scares People," one man ridiculed that notion. D.D. Selkirk of Spy Hill, Saskatchewan, is one of those who did not believe the ghostly light near Tabor is an owl with phosphorus wings. He says no owl would fly around the same place for 30 years, that the bobbing ball of fire always sticks to the road, that an owl would not, and that has come to within 2 or 3 feet of people before it would vanish. People at 3 feet would be able to distinguish an owl even on the darkest night, especially if it was lighted up by phosphorus. One brazen skeptic managed to grab a front-page headline for himself when he announced that he had a plan to trap the Tabor light in a specially designed mesh wire basket. He bragged that if he concealed himself holding this trap on the end of a long stick, he would quickly catch the light within it. He was quite sure that he would find in the basket was a swarm of small swamp flies or gnats. His scientific explanation of the light. No subsequent article in the newspaper suggested he was ever successful. It may be reasonable to assume that he simply changed his mind, as there were several accounts of skeptics who did a dramatic about-face after witnessing the light themselves. In one case, a police officer from Esterhazy was traveling the cemetery road when he saw a light approaching. Thinking it was a motorist with a burnt-out headlight, he leaned out the window of his vehicle, preparing to stop the approaching car. Much to his surprise, when the light came closer, he saw that there was no automobile supporting it. The officer stared at the apparition in shock as it bounded right past him on the road and eventually disappeared. Whether people believed the light to be of supernatural origin or a natural anomaly, the fascination grew. So did the crowds, and eventually the iron gates to the Tabor Cemetery were barred to stop the desecration of graves. The nightly vigils continued, but were confined to the roadside. Amid the commotion, there were suspicions raised about the people in the area in December of 1938, when officials and stenographers at the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Headquarters in Regina announced that letters coming from Esterhazy District had been marked with a mysterious and fearsome crab-like emblem. There is a brief speculation that residents of the region had cultishly adopted this insignia as their impression of the Tabor light, but it faded when the sketch stopped appearing. More than likely, this was simply a joke perpetrated by someone who had access to Esterhazy's mail. At the height of his popularity, the Tabor light inspired a fair bit of playfulness. James Brown, the proprietor of the hotel in Esterhazy, was confused one month when his power bill arrived. There was an addition charge levied for consumption of light made by the will-o'-the-wisp after midnight. Eventually, Mr. Brown decided that the folks at Canadian Utilities in Calgary were just having a little fun with him. Unfortunately, what was fun for some was a source of real fear for others. Farmers in the district truly believed that the frequent appearances of the light meant that doom was at their doorsteps. It was taken as a warning that something sinister was fated to occur in the area. Aggressive types ignored the fact they knew not what they were dealing with and organized armed patrols and volunteer watches by the cemetery at night. As worry spread, a local Catholic priest by the name Father J. Perriott suggested a form of spiritual protection. He told people that if they saw the light, to simply pray for the souls of those buried in Tabor. It was the second time in 33 years that he had offered that advice. Father Perriott had become the priest at Tabor Church, just north of Esterhazy, for 35 years. He had the perspective of someone who had lived in the area since the very first sighting of Old Faithful, and the perspective of a spiritual man. Perhaps that is why he was interviewed by the Regina Leader Post on December 1st, 1938. In the course of the interview, Father Perriott hinted at a connection between the phantom light and the early anti-religious sentiment of the cemetery's founders, but he claimed he could not offer no further explanation. The light is there, he added, but what it is, I do not know. It comes from the cemetery, and that cemetery is certainly a great mystery. On December 10th, just 9 days after his comments appeared in the newspaper, Father Perriott changed his story in a startling confession to his congregation. On December 11th, in a letter addressed to His Grace Archbishop Monaghan of Regina, he documented this confession. It was the revelation of a secret he had kept for 33 years, that he, Father J. Perriott, was responsible for the very existence of the Tabor Light. Father Perriott had come to the small church at Tabor in 1903, just as the anti-religious fervor was hitting its highest pitch. He found many of the Bohemian families living east of Esterhazy divided. Often the men had been reading atheist literature and were turning their backs on their faith, while the women still struggled to take their children to church and instill religious values. In one such family, a little girl died. The father refused a Christian service for her, maintaining that she had no soul. Despite her grieving mother's plea, the girl was buried unceremoniously in the Tabor Cemetery. It was 1905. The mother despaired constantly over her dead child and turned Father Perriott for consolation. To ease her distress, he assured her that he would do what he could for the girl through prayer, and he kept his word. That very day he had made the 18-mile journey from Tabor to Tabor, and by the side of the road he prayed. According to Father Perriott's confession, he prayed not only for the soul of the girl, but for a sign from God that she indeed had a soul. He prayed for a sign for the people, not in the cemetery where they would fear it to be a ghost, but on the road for all to see. Within days came the first reports of the Tabor Light, and for the first time Father Perriott encouraged people who saw it to pray for the souls of those buried in Tabor. 33 years later, as fear spread and farmers talked about selling out to escape the scourge that would surely befall them, he felt it necessary to share the decades-old secret of his petition to God. Was Father Perriott responsible for the Tabor Light? If so, why did he keep his involvement a secret for so long? Particularly when the light, in his view, was being so clearly misinterpreted. Was the story an invention, perhaps to calm growing fears and keep people from pulling up stakes and starting over elsewhere? Only one thing is certain. Father Perriott told two very different versions of the story. One to his congregation and to His Grace Archbishop Monaghan, and quite another in the interview he granted the Regina Leader Post. Not particularly priest-like behavior, perhaps he could be excused, given the highly unusual circumstances of his situation. Today the Tabor Light remains well known to locals, if not as dramatically active as it was in the late years of the Depression. Perhaps in true celebrity style, it will one day make a comeback. We can hope. This story takes place in Fairlight, Saskatchewan. Footsteps at Fairlight. It was harvest time, and as he did every fall, Kevin Potvin found himself working almost unbearably long days. He was in the fields at the crack of dawn, and seldom home until an hour or so after the sun had set. He loved farming, but each September he wondered if he had bitten off more than he could chew. After all, it wasn't just his own section he tended to, his late Grandpa Harold's land too. One night, Kevin worked later than unusual on his grandfather's farm. An uncle and cousin who were lending a hand had left an hour earlier, and Kevin found himself alone and exhausted as he shut down the combine. The 20-minute drive back to his own tiny trailer seemed insuperable, not to mention impractical, considering he would only enjoy a few hours' sleep before having to return at first light. He thought he had found a practical solution when he decided to stay right where he was and sleep in Grandpa Harold's deserted house. Although the 2-story farmhouse hadn't been used in years, it was a sound structure that hadn't fallen into despair. Doors and windows remained intact. Floors and walls met solidly. Certainly there was a lack of regular housekeeping, but Kevin was much too tired to mind the dust. He gratefully lugged his sleeping bag from the cab of his pickup truck to the bedroom at the top of the wide wooden staircase. There, on the antique wrought iron bed, he succumbed to his fatigue. Seemingly moments later, Kevin was wrenched from his unconsciousness. Brief panic welled in him when he couldn't immediately identify his surroundings. As the feeling gave way to recognition, he dazedly wondered what could have awakened him with such a start. Just overtired, he mumbled to himself, settling back down as he closed his eyes. He seemed to remember a vague dream, the sound of forceful pounding on the floor. But he wasn't dreaming now. It was so loud there was no mistaking the sound of those heavy footfalls on the stairs. Wide-eyed and now awake, Kevin sat up and held his breath, waiting to meet the intruder. He listened intensely as the footsteps paused at the top of the stairs, and then proceeded the short distance down the hall to his room. He steeled himself for a confrontation, waited tensely for the door to burst open, but strangely, nothing happened. It was several minutes before he found the courage to open the door himself. When he did, he faced nothing more frightening than a dark and empty hallway. Cursing himself for his own foolishness, Kevin went back to bed, determined to get the sleep he so desperately needed. His eyes had barely shut, however, when the mysterious footsteps started again at the bottom of the stairs. So there is someone there, he thought. This time I'll catch him in the act. Kevin slipped silently out of bed and tiptoed across the bedroom. As the stomping feet reached the top of the staircase, he threw open the bedroom door. There was nothing, and after all, how could there be? Because the moonlight pouring in through the window showed only one set of footprints in the thick dust on the stairs, and they belonged to Kevin. Shaken, he returned to his bed. Almost immediately, the haunting sound began again. By 2:00 in the morning, Kevin had taken to counting the number of stairs his unseen visitor climbed on each trip, as well as the number of heavy steps taken from the top of the staircase to the doorway to his bedroom. By 4 a.m., he decided to try sleeping in his truck. 2 hours later, Kevin's uncle arrived, and the workday began. "You look like hell," the uncle stated, when he saw the dark circles under Kevin's bloodshot eyes. "What were you doing after you got home last night?" "I didn't go home," said Kevin. "I saved some driving time and stayed here in the house." He left his explanation at that, not wanting to be ridiculed about what he had just experienced. Kevin's uncle shook his head solemnly. "You're braver than I am," he said wryly. Kevin asked him what he meant. "I tried staying here once, a couple years ago," the uncle explained. "Never got a wink of sleep. I kept hearing this stomping on the stairs. Sounded like heavy old work boots that Dad used to wear." Harold Potvin lived and died as a hard-working farmer, and it would seem that even now he hates to see anyone else rest when the fields need tending.